Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and I'm here with Audrey Waters. It's the 19th of August. Hello, Audrey.
Hello, hello.
This is the weekly, now every other week,
Sometimes
Hack Education podcast. When we feel like it, podcast.
Oh, we've been busy. That's our excuse. Traveling, busy, snafus, etc.
Yes, but we are back.
We are.
Okay, so we're going to go through a couple weeks of posts, which may mean that we may not have as much time for each one, but we'll do the best we can, and maybe a little less news. But tell me about Remix Ed.
This was a really interesting event that was held a couple weekends ago in Mountain View, California. And it's something that I've been thinking about. So you and I have talked about as well. Sort of does some of these models for hackathons work well for education? And Remix Ed was a hackathon that tried to bring together, a weekend-long hackathon, I should say, that tried to bring together educators, students, and programmers to try to not to build a startup as in the startup weekend model, but to try to work on tech projects, solve problems, and work through ideas. The attendance was a very interesting collection of groups. There were actually a lot of educators there and quite a few students, which is something that unfortunately I don't see a lot of. By that I mean K-12 students, not college students. And over the course of the weekend, I can't remember exactly how many groups ended up building things. I'd say half a dozen or so. But it had a very different flavor to it because it was certainly not focused on the tech startup world. It was really more on building tools that teachers wanted to solve, teachers and tutors wanted to solve for their own classrooms.
So I'm really curious about sort of the distinction between an event like that and the ed camps.
Mm-hmm.
The ed camps are clearly about conversation,
yeah.
And even Remix Ed, although not as product focused, is still kind of product outcome focused.
Yeah.
Is that the distinction?
I've not been to an ed camp before, so I can't, I'm not exactly sure I can speak to sort of what happens at one of those versus what happens at this hackathon. But it really was, I would say, I do think it was project focused. I'm not sure if product focused is the right word, but I would say project focused. So the teams were working on various tools. Joan Young was there, for example, working on some ideas that she wanted to build for a classroom project that she has going. So it's hard to say if it was a product, more of a project. I think maybe that's a sort of semantics, the difference there. But
no, I'm not sure it is. Because that is appealing to me, in part because it ties into our story of agency,
mm-hmm.
right? So it's unlike the startup weekend kind of event, where there's some form of voting that takes place, and then people are you're joining a particular project or product directed activity with
mm-hmm.
some kind of engineering related outcome. Speaking about projects says to me, this is about engagement, and that seems really valuable.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting, particularly to have this student group there and listen. There were a couple of student groups that were there, and listen to what the students actually wanted to devise to solve their own problems. Which again, thinking and how they were thinking through solving their own sort of, I wouldn't even say tech problems, but one of the groups wanted to devise a better way for them to share notes among one another, share class notes among one another, and talking about the ways in which they already used Facebook and sort of a number of different tools, and could they improve upon something like that. And it was really more of a sort of their own personal productivity hack, I would say, than necessarily something that would turn into a product or then perhaps even a business.
So I guess the question is, does this sit in an area that's really worth promoting? You have this long list of potential questions or problems associated with what's taking place here. But does the hackathon model sit separate from sort of weekend and ed camps in such a way as, because of the engagement and agency factor, that this is something that we should be encouraging?
I really do like hackathons, but I have a lot of questions and concerns about how they oftentimes get organized and what the goals are of the organizers. I think it's difficult in a lot of, particularly once the school year starts, it's really difficult to ask a group of teachers or to commit a weekend to these sorts of events. I mean, the hackathon model is something that really is sort of initially grew out of a very different sort of work environment. Folks who don't particularly have perhaps the same sort of work schedule that a teacher would. And so I think it's hard to sort of take something that's worked well in Silicon Valley and in the startup world and then the tech software world, and then plot that onto education without really thinking through what the goals are, what exactly we're trying to do, and by the same time, how can we take the best of what we think about project-based learning, about collaboration, about problem solving, and like you said, about student and learner agency, and have an event that helps people really learn to familiarize themselves with ways in which they can solve their own sort of ed tech problems.
That's really attractive to me. I mean, I can see sort of a basic framework. I can see kind of language around the value of hacking and around the value of being proactive and engaged, and positioning it somewhere because I believe it actually is something different than an ed camp or a startup weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of interesting potential here, and I'm hoping, I think that it's something that I know the organizers of Remix Ed are really thinking about and wanting to see if there's a way in which they can devise a model that would really work here. And so I think this is a good first start.
So is this Jesse Aurora
Yes.
primarily? Do you feel like it's moving in a direction that's we'll want to keep track of it?
I am definitely planning on keeping track of it. There was an ed camp this weekend in the Bay Area, so I'm not sure how these sort of overlap, how these sort of weekend-long events in general overlap. But I do think it's important to actually spend some time hacking, and I don't mean everyone needs to be a programmer, but I think the importance of actually, working on projects together, and not simply just, although it's great, not just sort of talking about things.
Yeah, and then you also have a question about sort of is there a takeaway that gets spread beyond that particular event to others? So is there the accumulation of some kind of knowledge? And that probably depends on whether or not there's an outcome or it's a process.
Yeah, I was in Washington, D.C. last week and had a really interesting conversation with Richard Collada from the Department of Education, and he was telling me about and AT&T is doing some education hackathons, and they seem to be doing a very good job of keeping track of what's been built, and I think that's something that is just how do we pass on the knowledge of what happens at these events in terms of the code, in terms of the projects that get created, so that we aren't necessarily recreating the wheel. Every 54-hour event doesn't churn out the same sort of set of 5 or 6 projects.
I actually feel kind of biased toward the value of recreating the wheel. I mean, in the same way that an AP U.S. history class may not come up with anything, brand new, but it's those conversations and discussions and the activity that doesn't necessarily have to get passed beyond it, but it's the value of that interaction. Let's keep thinking about that, because recreating the wheel doesn't sound unattractive to me.
Well, I think that it's important. I mean, I think if someone has spent a weekend coding something, if they can open source and share that code, there's not necessarily reason to start from scratch. I think that's what I mean. That if someone else has already sort of done a lot of the technical work, then you can build on that rather than just replicate it. But,
so I wonder if Jesse's thought about creating a network for that, because it would feel like if people attend, a very natural way to do that would be to have some form of social networking after the events.
I would hope so, and I think that this is, I would say that this is something that I've hoped to have seen coming from Startup Weekend EDU that I haven't really seen either, is how do you, how do you share the knowledge with other people?
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about the banality of textbooks.
Yeah, it's not surprising that it being back to school season that there's been a lot of sort of textbook news lately, and I was really struck, and I guess this will coincide with the story that I wrote this week as well, but I've been really struck with how boring this news is, and I don't know if it's just the fact that we've been hearing for really years now that we're on the cusp of a textbook revolution, that digital publishing is going to unseat the textbook industry, that everything's changed, that everything's better, that students are going, backs are going to be saved because they won't have to lug around these heavy and expensive tomes. And sort of watching the news cross the wire, almost all of the stories seem to me to be frightfully dull. And even I was glad to see sort of Boundless, a startup that got in trouble earlier this year when it was sued by textbook makers for copyright infringement. It finally opened up its doors, and I was really eager to see what exactly Boundless was doing. And again, that company that's been touted as sort of really being on pushing things forward in terms of free resources for students. And I was just really disappointed with the content there. So I think maybe I'm just jaded and I'm sick of digital textbook stories.
No, I think we've covered this so many times. Again, those stories are coming out of a framing by the existing institutional players.
Yes.
Because you have this great sort of news summary on digital textbooks that are coming out that are free and openly licensed, right? From some sort of lesser known names. Garden Valley State University, Kansas State.
Right.
And again, there's this sort of wonderful sense here that the non-traditional players are going to be able to usurp some of the power.
Right.
Right. And also then this highlighter story, which we should probably shift to right now, just to shift the conversation, but where clearly we're beginning to get to a place where the marginalia, the notes, can get shared, and the original book becomes the launching place for conversation.
I think I'm biased here. I picked Highlighter last year as one of my favorite startups of 2011, and the company's really sort of evolved since then. Initially, they launched just a JavaScript plugin that you could add to your website so that people could sort of mark up and make comments like in the body of a blog post rather than just leave a comment at the end. And I am when I read, I do make a lot of notes in the margins, and so this is something that I was really missing in the move to ebooks. But Highlighter now is really expanding. They've moved to an HTML5 publishing format that allows for publishers and for professors to put all of their course materials and reading assignments into this platform that allows those conversations to happen right in the body of the text. And I think students can ask each other questions, students can sort of engage socially with the reading in a way that I think is interesting. And I think because they're working with openly licensed content too. To me, it's as someone who, again, pretty bored of textbook stories, moving away from thinking about how do we republish things and thinking about how can we engage with reading material in more interesting and social ways. To me, that's a more exciting story.
We've talked about this experience I had before, taking the train through the Sierra Nevada mountain range and seeing where they used to harvest ice, and then with refrigeration, how quickly these existing businesses just disappeared, and there was no value in being the ice transport company anymore. Part of what's exciting to me about this story is if it's really compelling to be able to springboard off the original content into conversations, it could really upset the apple cart, right? The freely licensed material, where they aren't jumping through all kinds of hoops to get author permissions, could sort of substantially overtake our existing material. I know that Amazon has really struggled because they would like to be doing more conversation associated with the Kindle book, but the legal rights associated with the content are so complicated for them that it could take a decade.
Well, this is one of the things, I do read via ebooks via a Kindle, and it always strikes me as such a missed opportunity. You can sort of access a list of your own highlights, but there's really no way, and you can sort of see within the text, like sometimes you see, 1,000 people have also highlighted this paragraph, but there's really no way to sort of do anything with that material. So I can't easily, and I think they're trying to build some social elements around it, but it's just not seamless, right? So you have to sort of go out of your way to log into your Amazon profile and see the notes that you wrote on X, Y, or Z book. It's not surfaced in the margins for you. And that's what I'd like to see. There are people that you would genuinely want to know, of course, your classmates in a traditional classroom, but your professor. But there are people that you would generally want to sort of read along with them and talk along, have sort of this digital book club with them.
Yeah, I still maintain that Google's Circles, Google Plus has really not taken off for me in any way, shape, or form. But that Google Circles model is sort of brilliantly poised to allow that kind of conversation within specific groups.
Right.
Okay, so what is MOOC? MOOC
was a great week-long MOOC, although this word is sort of becoming used. I'm not sure if it was. I'm not sure how massive you have to be a MOOC, but this is a week-long sort of meta MOOC, I guess, talking about this new or some of the sort of hubbub around the massive online open course that we're seeing right now, put on by folks at I believe Georgia Tech and Marylhurst University, maybe Georgia. One of the universities in Georgia, and it was really interesting to see conversations from a variety of disciplines talking about sort of how we teach and how we learn in these settings. So sort of talking actually about the things that that you and I have talked about before, like really what's going on in these classes. Are we really just transferring sort of lectures and video lectures into these online formats and calling it good? So lots of the exercises over the week were very interesting. Participating in a massive Google Doc collaborative writing assignment with a couple hundred people working on a Google Doc writing assignment together. There were some interesting exercises in, I think, forcing professors to think through some of the experiences that learners might have in classes as well, which is, I think, really important before we sort of march off into this future that we're actually thinking through what the experiences are of learners.
You'll be happy to know that Stephen Downs and Alec Koros and Dave Cormier and some others are actually going to come into a Future of Education session, and we're going to do a history of the MOOC.
Excellent.
session.
Very good. About time.
Should be very fun. Okay, so I'm not currently doing consulting work for Instructure, although I have in the past. Tell me we can talk about this without my having a conflict of interest. What was the experience like of doing this in Instructure?
Well, I thought that was very interesting because for me that was one of the things that I was planning on paying closest attention to, particularly having had a really sort of awful experience with the attempt of Curtis Bach to hold a MOOC in the Blackboard platform. And some of my concerns, too, with Coursera and Udacity, that there really are just creating these websites that are reinscribing some of the worst practices that we see in the learning management system. So I was eager to see, having never used Instructure before, what Instructure was like. And what was really interesting about this particular MOOC was that the conversations really were elsewhere. There were forum-based introductions, and then a lot of the conversations actually happened on Twitter. A lot of the assignments were in Google Docs, and so it seemed very much that the learners were more along the line of the connectivist MOOCs, where the learners were sort of elsewhere rather than being sort of trapped within the learning management system. So I'm not sure I could actually have much to say about Instructure. But it certainly didn't feel like I was limited by the technology, but I think in some ways it has to do with the instructional design and the plans of the organizers, and less to do with sort of a win or a loss on the part of the Instructure Canvas product.
Interesting. I think that we're going to come back to that. The whole sense of who creates the structure, and is it valuable to have somebody sort of formally structure it?
Yeah.
Okay, in news that's in the totally unexpected category, MIT's reality TV show.
Yeah, I think that this is wonderfully hilarious. Again, particularly because with this rush now to have these lecture-based video classes in these online scenarios, particularly around science topics, that seems to run counter to what we know students in the sciences really want to do hands-on experimentation, right? And so while we're so busy creating these new platforms for people just to sort of listen to lectures, we seem to be forgetting the importance of actually doing things with their hands. And so I think this is a really clever move on the part of MIT. In some ways, this is marketing for the campus experience, for the residential campus experience. But this is a show that follows a bunch of freshmen through a class that they take, that if they pass, they are guaranteed a job in a research lab at MIT. And so it's a really great way of showcasing how some of the excitement and some of the fears that these students have of actually doing, which in case for many of them is actually their first experience working in a lab. So I thought it was an interesting twist on how we're thinking about online video right now.
I thought it was just screamingly brilliant. I really love it. I mean,
I got a sneak preview. I got a sneak preview of the episodes too, and it's actually was. They just done a great job with it. It's really quite compelling. The students' stories are very compelling, and so they've done a great job with it.
One of the things I really appreciated about reality TV, for all its faults, is that especially these talent competition shows and the cooking shows, they do a really good job of showing how much work there actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Probably not perfect, but they give a really good glimpse into the kind of dedication and attention and process that take place when previously we just saw the end result. And this makes so much sense to me, especially because it is this great argument for here's why you're physically on campus.
Well, absolutely. And I think, again, sort of the irony that this was coming out of MIT, and this is actually an initiative from the MIT Open Courseware project, which is important as well. They have a lot of outreach efforts to high school students, and so this is definitely geared. These are freshmen at MIT. This show is really geared to high school students in a lot of ways, to think about what the potential of future science careers. And it's a strong argument, not just for MIT, which of course has a great reputation in sciences. It's absolutely a strong argument for a residential campus experience, hands-on learning.
I think it's terrific. Okay, I'm not as excited about the former Flip video execs launching Nomia.
Me neither.
In part again because it's this focus on the ed market.
Yeah.
What again? I shouldn't steal your thunder. Tell me about it.
Well, this is an interesting. It's an interesting story, and it's certainly partially because this is sort of thinking about how companies, how startups sort of market themselves. And so Nomia is an educational video platform that's really right now able to tap into all of this buzz that we're hearing about the flipped classroom. So there's plenty of discussion about flipped classroom. It just so happens that the founders of Nomia are two of the former executives from the company that made the flip camera, which unfortunately I think was shuttered by Cisco after it was acquired by Cisco. But I think in a lot of ways the flip camera still is a well-loved and probably in a lot of classrooms still used piece of equipment. And so it really feels like it's sort of a perfect storm of the tapping into the right usage of flipped classroom, flip video. But I was less than thrilled with thinking about how they're positioning this. They insisted to me that this was really about tapping into and changing the tutoring the tutoring market, and their expectation that the tutoring market is going to sort of explode in the coming years. And so I don't know, honestly, if the solution for tutoring really is having your child watch a bunch of videos. And so I think that there were a lot of things about this that made me not terribly excited. Even if you curate a bunch of videos together, they're hosting it on their own platform in order to sort of, I imagine, get away from some of the concerns that people have about YouTube. But to me, it didn't really feel like there was much there that would make a compelling case why you'd go to Nomia, as opposed to just look through YouTube or look through Khan Academy, even if you were looking for video help.
This story, I think, is actually relates to MOOC and MIT, and is going to relate to the 6.003Z, right? Because this is still delivery model.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's delivery model, and it's in somebody's imagined structure for delivery. Right. So in the same way that you said you didn't really depend on Instructure for the infrastructure for the MOOC, it feels as though there's a lesson there about this attempt to create overarching structures that are imagined to be the place everybody will go.
I think that is precisely right. I think that, one of the things that I've seen, one of the trends that I've been thinking about a lot this year is this desire to create an education platform. Everyone wants to be the destination site, and I'm not sure that that's the right way to think about it. I think I would much rather think of us knowing the best way, having distributed resources, finding places that are perhaps portals to those, finding the people that we trust to have recommendations on where to go for resources, the importance of things like curation and aggregation. But having a platform, creating a platform, I'm not sure that that's the right I'm not sure that that's the right move. And I think that that's particularly when there are already these other platforms in place. I mean, like YouTube.
So MIT videos show the value of the physical and sort of apprenticeship relationships that take place in education.
Mm-hmm.
That distinguishes that video as being more than just sort of delivery of content, but actually kind of showcasing the value of the human relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
And then as we're going to talk about with this learner-created MOOC, what Nomia doesn't seem to be doing is actually having the student as creator.
That's another thing as well, is that this is geared towards tutors right now. They say teachers can create an account, but this absolutely, or right now on their roadmap, no indication that students would make videos, that there would be peer-to-peer learning, that this is very much sort of the model of the teacher has the information and will make a video to share it with you, or the teacher will tell you which video to watch based on what, quote, the best teachers in the world have to say. And the only choice I think that students have would be to choose between, do you prefer how Saul Kahn explains graphing an equation, or do you prefer how someone else explains how to graph an equation? But there's no opportunity for students to sort of do that themselves.
Okay, so tell us about this learner-created MOOC that's spun off of the 6002 course. Was it the 6002
Yes.
course? This,
I think, is if I had to pick something, I would say that this is actually the coolest thing to come out of the MOOCs. And this is MITx has only offered one class, the 6.002, which is an introductory class on circuits and electronics that a lot of students, if they're in the engineering, the electrical engineering, and in the computer science degrees at MIT have to take. So this is a required class for a lot of MIT students. That was the first class that MITx offered. And as the class wrapped up, some of the students were very disappointed to learn that MIT, or now edX, had no plans to offer the next class in the series, 6.003 Signals and Systems. So they decided to do it themselves. They took the OpenCourseWare resources from MIT, which, funnily enough, contain these great videos from, I think, the mid-90s, perhaps. And again, boy, we've sure been doing online video for a long time. But videos from the mid-90s, the resources from MIT OpenCourseWare, they designed some of their own exercises, they built a website, they built a wiki, and they offered their own class, which I think is great.
And it's remixing. It's just lovely.
Yep.
What a great story. Verena Roberts, who just ran a K-12 MOOC, kind of rebranded the M in MOOC, instead of being massive, as being meaningful, which is going to lead down all kinds of weird little paths. But I actually loved the numbers here. I mean, this was in the hundreds.
Right.
And that felt so much more meaningful to me than tens of thousands.
Well, and interestingly, that was, I think, the number of enrollments in the MOOC as well, so 500, which is still, I mean, that's massive. The largest class that I ever taught had 100 students, and that was overwhelming. And so 500 students is still a heck of a lot of students to participate in a class online. But yeah, I thought this was really great. And the other thing about this 6.003Z class was this was also a global collaboration as well. But these were three students, one from India, one from the U.S., and now I don't recall where the other one was from. That had, obviously had never met face to face, but had developed an intellectual community, a learner community themselves, and moved this forward. And that's a really great outcome. It's creating a learner community. It's not just what did you learn, what skills did you gain, can you pass the final exam, but it's creating a community of people that are again, back to the connectivist model, that are networked and can share things together.
Really fascinating. It raises all kinds of questions about assessment, especially as you get these dispersed ways of holding the conversations and continuing, right? So the MOOC, this 6.003Z, an attempt to badge that or create an assessment system feels like it would so lag behind the actual value of the person who absorbs the material and then is able to do something with it.
Yeah, I think when you have Dave Cormier on to talk about the history of MOOCs, you should ask him about assessment, because I think he has some interesting thoughts on what this looks like in these sorts of MOOC scenarios too.
Interesting. Okay, so academia.edu. This sounded like a pretty positive move.
Yeah, this was one of those sites that I certainly wish had been around when I was in graduate school, and sort of I made the note to self to sort of upload some of my academic papers to this site, because I do think that the inability to sort of track who's reading your work, track who's citing your work, is something that academic publishing is really a black box. And it's not just a black box because, our articles are behind really expensive paywalls. It's very hard because of the length of the publishing cycle. It can be 3 years between when you write an article and when it finally actually is in print. And so I think anything that can help crack open that, shed some sunlight for scholars for the sake of research and scholarship, so that people can see who's reading your work, who's citing your work, what's trending in your field, I think is really, really interesting stuff. I had, I think that there are several other startups or companies that offer similar types of offerings, but all in the good service, I think, of helping to make academic research more open.
So I think the idea was you publish your research, it takes time to go through the publishing process, then somebody's going to reference that work, they go through the time of their own publishing process,
right.
And it's just such a delay
right.
that you don't actually have good feedback on how influential the things that you wrote about have been.
Right. I have an article that was published, I think, in 2002, I believe, that if I look on Google Scholar, which checks the citations based on what is indexable through Google and Google Books, that it's really interesting. But even that shows such a delay in the reverberation of that research. So it's very hard for you to actually ascertain what that means. So you wrote an article in the early 2000s, and it doesn't actually sort of hit Google Scholar and show that other people are reading it until 2007. That hardly gives you any sort of feedback. And again, my field is science, and so it was sort of the stakes are even greater, I think, in the scientific world. But thinking about how long it takes before people can know, people can sort of really take advantage of what others are take advantage of learning based on what others are reading. Okay,
you're starting a new project on the state of open educational resources.
Yes, it's I'm doing some research. This is somewhat like the research that I conducted for Mozilla earlier this year. This time around, I'm looking at the state of open educational resources. So, what are some of the repositories? What's out there in terms of content? But really, some of the question that I have is sort of how is this being remixed? And you mentioned this earlier in terms of the class that spun out of MITx. But are these open educational resources being utilized? How are they being utilized? And are they sort of just being adopted whole scale? Or because they're openly licensed, are people really taking advantage of the fact that you can mix and match and delete and cut and mash up things. And if they aren't, is that a cultural issue, or are there technological barriers standing in the way of our making good use of OER? So this research is being underwritten by Funny Monkey, which is a educational Drupal shop in Portland, Oregon.
So we've talked before about perceptions of how much educators really want to use other lesson plans or remix them. Was it LearnCast? Who was it that kind of reached back to you and indicated that a fairly significant volume of activity that I wouldn't have suspected? They made a contribution to you
Better
on
lesson.
your website.
No.
Better lesson.
No, teachers. Now I can't remember.
We better get it right since they did make a contribution to you, right?
Yeah. Better get it right. Yeah, I've drawn a complete blank.
Okay, so whoever that was, we'll give them due credit at some future point in time. But it was a surprise to me how much activity there was, and so this is an unknown area, right? How much is actually getting used in terms of lesson plans, and then how much is getting remixed and contributed back. And my suspicion would be that it's low, but I'm wondering if I'm going to get disproved.
Okay, so it was teachers pay teachers, and
good.
I do think that it's low, and I think that in some ways that we can chalk it up to sort of cultural issues, that teachers are busy, they don't have time, but I'm not sure that that's the entire story, and I do think that there are technological things standing in the way as well. I have a little beef with the PDF as the format that we release a lot of documents in, because the PDF is actually sort of a closed, proprietary, hard-to-crack open format. And so publishing something openly licensed in a PDF only gets you so far. It's very hard to copy and paste and cut things out of, particularly sort of tables or diagrams out of PDF. So I'm really interested to sort of see what the stumbling blocks and sort of the rationale as well for using OER.
Can't wait to hear more from you on this. Okay, sort of switching to the news. We've had a girl who was disciplined for taking photos of the school lunches. You had a story about a young man in high school who was also disciplined for something related to, he built a system for his school. Do you remember what that was?
That was a student who built a way to sort of check and see if there were open classes at his university.
Well, so no, there was a high school story. This latest story, it's from 2 weeks ago now. The University of Central Florida, now a university student placed on academic probation for creating this website that, for a small fee, would notify students when a seat became open in the class. I'm thinking, brilliant. But of course there may be more to the story. But tell us why he was placed on probation.
Well, the university says that the service that the script that he wrote looked like a denial of service attack. That it was calling their servers so many times that they were having trouble maintaining the responsiveness of their site. And the student in question says that he's a little suspicious with that, but I think that he was placed on academic probation, I think, for quite a lengthy amount of time. And really, this does seem to be an innovation that they could have perhaps adopted into their system. I think the question of charging people a fee doesn't seem fair, but in terms of making sure that all students have equitable access to signing up for classes, and not just those who can, afford to hop ahead in the line. But I think it's sort of one of these interesting examples too of how students are doing really innovative things to sort of make their world better. Again, hack their own systems, to hack education, and the institutions sort of respond often, sort of overreact, I think, when punishing them.
Again, there may be details of the story we don't know, but it does have shades of Ryerson, right? Academic probation, sort of knee-jerk reaction. Maybe there's more that's not evident in the limited amount that we've talked about here. But it does seem like this is a funny response when you would almost think, bring the kid in and say, hey, this is totally cool, but we want to do it for free, and how can we figure out how to do this so that all students benefit?
Exactly.
Okay, so the California Student Aid Commission axed 154 schools from the financial aid program. And it would seem like, is this sort of the result of some of these studies that have come out and shown dropout rates and the like?
Yeah, I think that this is certainly the case. It was a couple of weeks ago now since Senator Tom Harkin's a report on the for-profit universities, and it certainly seems as though this is the response of the state of California. I should make clear that these are for grants and scholarships that the state awards. This doesn't affect the federal financial aid, but they certainly have taken a number of schools off the list, so you can no longer get state-funded scholarship and state-directed scholarship money for attending the University of Phoenix, which is a pretty big deal. Pretty strong reaction from the state of California.
Well, and you make note later that ProPublica notes that there's been industry pushback on those reports, but no arguing about the figures.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. And as these statistics continue to come out, and you can really see, we spend so much time, I think, talking in toto about some of these, the burden of student loan debt, the rising cost of tuition, and I think taking a look at some of the figures of the for-profits versus the not-for-profits, and seeing the much higher rate of students defaulting on their loans, the much lower rate of completion, and even in a lot of cases, or on average even, the much higher rate of tuition. And so this promise that having for-profit universities that will have sort of be able to be leaner and more competitive and offer students a better deal, it's just so far proven to be not true.
COPPA is the Children Online Privacy and Protection Act. The FCC is seeking public comments on revisions to COPPA. How's that going?
I haven't looked closely at what they're changing. Earlier, when the revisions to COPPA first were being considered, there was some talk that they were thinking of raising the age to 18, but thankfully that's been thrown out. But it sort of remains to be seen whether the changes to COPPA, I think much of it has to do with clarifying the language. Again, this COPPA was, I think, passed in 1996, so certainly the pre-Facebook era. I think Mark Zuckerberg was 13 then. But I think they're clarifying the language around requirements for mobile applications and mobile apps, and not just the web. So some of this is a matter of cleaning up and clarifying the language.
But does it look like the age 13 restriction is going to be changed at all? I get the feeling it's not.
No, I don't think it will be. No.
So this still creates this sort of interestingly awkward space where really good products can't be used by teachers for students under 13. Right, and as we've seen before, particularly with Facebook, the sort of dangerous practice that we have now of actually parents helping their children lie to get around some of these some of these restrictions. Is there a good solution on the horizon for this? I think that I'm not sure what the solution is. The article that I linked had some pretty interesting conversations, and I think that these are the things that Dana Boyd has talked about as well, is that we actually have to have better conversations about protecting everybody and not just protecting those under 13. But what are the ways in which all of our privacies are protected? How can we make sure that we're all safe online, rather than just identifying a certain subset of the population and having these restrictions
on websites for kids. I mean, really, all of us should be able to be able to have better control over how our data is used, not just children.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It also would make sense to me if there was the creation of some kind of a path or set of precautions that a company could take that would allow it to offer a form of their service to those under 13, as long as they abided by certain, basic commitments that they would make. Because clearly there are commercial organizations that are outsourced to for student information systems that have data on students that are under 13, and they are commercial companies.
Right.
But the big fear is that someone like Ning or Mighty Bell or any of these other services, right? The big fear is we don't want to be the ones to get sued by the FCC,
right?
And be made the example case.
Yeah, COPPA just doesn't seem like the right solution, and it certainly doesn't. I mean, it certainly doesn't feel like it really is protecting children. And I do think, unfortunately, it's stifling innovation, in we could see some really great sites used for kids, and so it's unfortunate that sort of our fears, some of us, I think our fears that aren't grounded at all in reality about sort of predators online. Some of it just has to do with, I think, again, old laws that don't really apply to what the technology looks like today.
I actually really agree with the concern about commercial solicitations, right? And commercial companies keeping student data. That's something. I mean, keeping anybody's data, as you indicate, Dan Boyd is talking about. Interesting. Okay, so this Upstart story had me wondering, right? Not bad enough that students leave college with student loan debt, but are they now going to leave with hanging over their heads a portion of their income having to be paid back to people who loaned them money? Tell me this is a better story than I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, no, this I wasn't quite able to wrap.
This is Upstart.
Upstart, right. This is Upstart. This is the new startup from Dave Gerard, who used to be the head of the Google Apps team. He was the person in charge of Google Apps entirety, but certainly Google Apps for schools as well. He left Google to found this company that allows it's like a crowdfunding model, sort of, for school. You get a loan, and then you have to promise, sort of, as you said, a certain, or I don't know if it's a loan, you shouldn't get investment in them with a promise to pay back some of their income to the people who lend them money. And so, I mean, hooray for thinking about crowdfunding models. Hooray for recognizing that that we should have access to other ways to pay for school other than necessarily than student loans. But I'm not sure, this didn't quite fit well with me either, for reasons that I'm not sure are practical or if they're psychological on my part.
If it's an investment in the individual and it's a percentage of their income after school, that troubles me.
Yeah.
If it's a percentage of potential income from a particular project, like a limited investment, where if the project fails, there's no recourse by the investor, then that would seem like a more interesting piece to me. But the way that this read, I thought, oh my gosh, this is indentured servitude.
Yeah,
there's something sort of deeply flawed if it's actually a percentage of your total earnings.
It's a percentage of it is a percentage of your income, and it's again I'm not. Yeah, so I'm not. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make.
And we thought it was bad enough to work for a corporation.
Now they own you starting when you're a freshman.
Oh my gosh! I hope this is different than we're interpreting it. Skillshare has launched hybrid classes.
Yeah, you actually talked to the co-founder of Skillshare recently, didn't you? This is interesting. They're a sort of
I did.
They're one of these startups that says sort of anyone can be a teacher. Share what you know. You can have primarily it's been classes in a few major cities, so New York, I think San Francisco, but not too many other locations. And now they're offering a blended learning model where some of the class is taught online and some of it's still the traditional sort of workshop on site.
Yeah, I'm really interested in following. I need to do some more homework on this. I'm very interested to see where they're going with this. I want them to be more successful than I get the feeling they are, but I'm very anxious to see what's happening there. I'm not anxious to spend any more time thinking about the Department of Ed's Race to the Top initiatives.
Hear, hear. And yet, almost every week we hear some new plans to have more competition so schools and districts and states can scramble for funding. Instead of an equitable system, we now have to race for money, which I don't know. It just I find that notion to be pretty icky, pretty strong-handed, and not at all how I like to think money is. Money for education would be allocated in this country.
I've spent some time thinking about this word competition because I'm troubled by this idea that the Department of Ed is using this word, and there is this actual competition. I'm troubled by our using the word when we talk about competing with students from other countries based on standardized test scores. So I looked the word up, and the original Latin roots. I'm not pretending that we have used this word in different ways, say in the last decades or centuries, but I'm curious. The original Latin roots meant to come together and to strive together rather than against each other. And I feel like that's kind of a sort of a powerful imagery of how we've perverted the educational process into a competition.
Gosh, don't tell the Department of Ed that. Now that's how we're going to market this. This isn't really pitting school districts against school districts. This is a coming together.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. No, but I am curious. I mean, the whole idea of this being a competition feels to me that in some ways this is at the core of the language problem we're having as we're describing education right now.
Yeah. And I think that's and I think that's one of the reasons why this particular initiative, I think, really doesn't sit well with a lot of folks too. Is that this seems to be tapping into sort of the worst possible motivations and the worst possible rewards for doing well. Because if you do well, other people. It's at the expense of other people.
It felt at least like in the previous Race to the Top incarnation that it was actually a very small amount of money compared to the total budgets for states for education, but it was this tiny little tail wagging a huge dog. Is the same thing true here? Is this just a disproportionate amount of attention being exerted by the federal government for what doesn't amount to being a lot of money?
Perhaps $400 million in grant for this district level Race to the Top. I don't know. That seems like a lot of money, and I'm not sure if this is what this sort of breaks down into. I'm not sure if $400 million is actually $1,400,000 grants or something else. So I don't actually know. It's hard for me to sort of judge how much this is going to move certain things.
I actually, again, you and I probably both don't know, but I would guess that $400 million in terms of total educational budgets is actually relatively small. Yeah. So I'll be curious to see if this ends up doing the same thing that we've seen before, which is that it's disproportionately influential. Okay, so there's a third back-to-school bus tour by Secretary of Education Ronnie Duncan.
That's right.
I didn't even know there were 2 previous ones, but that
Lord.
shows how much I've been
Nor
following.
did I. And I actually
Sorry.
I actually had a really snarky comment here about the path he was taking across country, but then I decided to delete that. He opted not to go. I think having driven from coast to coast several times before. You learn sort of there's that stretch of America that grows a lot of corn. That's a sort of a tough bit of stretch to drive through. So I was making some sort of assessment about which states he was passing through. But it looks like he's just cutting the country in half.
Interesting. Well, we'll see what happens there. Some relatively positive news on Khan Academy.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're going to be very glad to hear us saying something positive.
Yeah,
right?
I'm planning this weekend it's Sunday evening. I'm planning at some point soon to go through and have a closer look at this. But yeah, Khan Academy launched its computer science curriculum this week. And this is something people have been wanting and waiting for a long time, in part because John Resig, who's a very well-known developer, the creator of a JavaScript library called jQuery, was sort of an early person to join the Khan Academy team. And so folks have really been anxious to see what Khan Academy would do around computer science. And I don't think folks were very disappointed. I mean, I think folks have been generally very pleased to see what was unveiled. Resig says that he actually took a lot from that video that you and I talked about by Brett Victor, thinking through ways of having a screen, a text editor that you could manipulate the code and immediately get feedback on what's happening visually. So they're using JavaScript and processing as the first languages for people to learn. And so far, people seem pretty excited by the text editor and the way in which they're approaching this. So that's good.
So an animation teacher at the Art Institute of California is potentially going to be fired for refusing to make students buy a textbook. Is this as draconian as it sounds?
This is, the Art Institute of California is, I think, one of these for-profit, although, having been around for a long time, offline for-profit universities. But this does sound pretty draconian. He says if students don't use the book, there's a particular book that the university, the school wants him to assign. He refuses, and it looks like he will face losing his job for that decision.
Interesting. The many unemployed recent college graduates, though, will be glad to hear that beyond a doubt, the value of a college degree is clear.
This is data that comes from Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce that always do some interesting research into just that, education and the workforce. And they've looked at the latest economic recession and really separated out who's the employment and unemployment trends based on your level of education. And when you separate these out, you can definitely see the trends that have actually been happening for some time now. Those without a college degree are actually faring far worse than those who do have a college degree. And so, the Atlantic says definitely this shows that college degrees are worth it. Certainly indicates that in difficult economic times, those without college degrees are having a far harder time finding work.
Yeah, I need to look those statistics up because it feels as though that news might be mitigated just by the sheer number of people out of work, even who have college degrees. So it may be easier if you have a college degree, but if you're still one of those many who have a college degree who's not working,
right,
feels a little bit like cold comfort.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I saw this American Revolution 2.0 and I really wanted to like it. But
yeah.
This is one of those groups I have a hard time liking.
Well, this is an investment firm. They do put out some pretty interesting research. This particular white paper they're calling American Revolution 2.0. It's meant to look at the ways in which sort of innovation in the education business education industry and is going to sort of revitalize the economy, this country's economy, sort of now, forever, the future, la, la, la. I have a real hard time with the framing this metaphor of using war to, if we think competition, if we think race to the top and competition is bad, using war to describe education is, to me, really rubs me the wrong way. I think there was one of the chapters was called like weapons of mass instruction, and I thought that's just revolting. And it's just like a revolting. And so when you use that sort of metaphorical language, how does that frame the way in which you approach the subject? Right? This isn't actually about. This is about destruction.
Wait, they use the phrase weapons. They use the phrase weapons of mass instruction. Yeah. So do they know the provenance of that?
I do not.
Because that's the John Taylor Gatto book that basically skewers the methodology of mass instruction.
I would guess no. I would guess no.
That's fascinating. Wow. Well, that's worth following up on. There's some snarkiness available to us there. How interesting. Well, I'm trying to remember the name of the gal who came on my show from that particular investment group. But I have a hard time with the whole idea that this is a huge financial market.
Yeah.
Which is essentially how they seem to couch everything. The education is a business arena.
Right. The opportunities.
And I just don't.
That the opportunities here, even if you frame it in terms of the opportunities are always framed in terms of economic moving economies forward and profits. And that there would be no other reason why we would want to have well-educated people other than an economic rationale.
So the core question, and I didn't invent this, but it was Mark Tucker, I think, whom I interviewed about his book on the PISA tests and the lessons from Shanghai and other countries. And the core question is, none of the countries that seem to be doing a really good job with robust educational systems are using the market-based concept for reform.
Right.
And are we just, we're either doing something incredibly cutting edge that's going to prove everybody else wrong, or we're willfully ignoring that the real success is not coming from the kind of reforms that we're discussing.
Right. I think that there is, certainly these narratives around broken schools, broken systems, creating opportunities for investment, and not civic investment, not public investment, but private investment. It all seems to be part of a particular narrative around. This particular revolution, American Revolution 2.0, I think is a rather chilling. It's a rather chilling vision in my book.
Especially given the financial history of our country in the last 20 years, the idea that the market is going to solve education almost seems ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
It is ludicrous to me.
Right.
Too strong a statement?
No, I don't think it's too strong a statement.
Speaking of which, there was a lot of funding in the last 2
Indeed.
weeks.
There was a lot of funding in the last 2 weeks. Class Dojo, Behavior Management app, Educreations, both of those companies raised around $2 million. RSmart, which handles the open source LMS Sakai, they raised $10.75 million, and EverFi, a DC-based company, also raised $10 million. And that was just in this past week. So, yeah, investors are interested in education.
Amazing. And let's end on a really positive note. Pearson announces that they're going to create a Pearson College in the UK.
Yeah, I was like looking at the rest of this list thinking, what on earth is the positive note list? Yes. Well, Pearson, the company we've been waiting for to come in and fix the British education system, right? The Pearson is launching a Pearson College. It's a for-profit university in the UK, offering a business and enterprise degree. So I'm not sure what that would mean on a resume, but I would run from it.
Very funny. Audrey, nice to be back.
Definitely.
In conversation. Mm-hmm. Always makes my week.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a great week.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.